is Cybersecurity, Understanding and Maximizing Government and Private Industry Partnerships. And our overall goal for the panel here is we have subject matter experts from 4 different agencies within the federal government, and then we have Marianne Bailey, who was the home run to get here for me, and you'll see as we move along, will give you really insight from working with the government, working outside the government, and helping companies work with the government to protect themselves in their customer data and intellectual property. So with that, the way we'll start off is, I'm not going to read the bios of our esteemed panelists. Instead, I'm going to go down the queue, and one by one, they'll introduce themselves. They'll tell you what they do and what their background is. So first off, I have Daniel King, and Daniel is with US CISA, and most importantly, he's a consistent guest lecturer in our cybersecurity program here at Boston College. So Daniel, if you could, tell us a bit about yourself.
It's a question of priorities, right? Okay.
Yeah, Boston College.
Yeah, absolutely right. So yes, Daniel King, Chief of Cybersecurity for CISA Region 1. So Region 1 is here in New England. The office is down in Boston. We're responsible for everything from Rhode Island up through Maine. And my line of effort, my team, is the cybersecurity portion of CISA. We also host other experts, advisors in protective security, chemical security, and then also emergency communications. And our role is to obviously protect critical infrastructure across the nation. Cyber defense is obviously one of the critical focus areas for our organization, but it also extends into the largely collaborative partnership across not just Department of Homeland Security, which is our overarching agency, but across the entirety of the federal government, and then also into the private sector. So a lot of really remarkable outcomes that hopefully we're going to be able to explore a little bit today, return on investment and partnership. And with that, pass it on to the next.
Excellent. And who we have here is Nate Kearns. Nate has about 1 million titles. He is here in his capacity as Senior Advisor for U.S. Cyber Command, but he also, his day job is he is General Counsel for the Defense Institute of International Legal Studies down in Newport, Rhode Island, which is a DoD component known as DILS. And also, he is an adjunct faculty member for our cybersecurity program here at Boston College.
That's me. No. So yeah, I've been working in international cybersecurity for about 15 years now, working with a lot of partners and international engagements throughout the world. Headed to Taiwan this weekend. I just flew back from Africa and activated multiple times when Russia invaded Ukraine to U.S. Cyber Command. Looking forward to this panel, and I will say thank you to Boston College, to Kevin, for hosting us, but I can't echo enough the needs of everything to be partnerships. And you heard from the FBI Deputy Director. I will just foot stomp our adversaries. Every pebble matters, every stone matters, everything matters, and we need to recognize as a collective that it has to be an all-hands-on-deck effort for us to have a shot at coming together to keep this great nation moving. So it's an honor to be here.
Thank you. And next up is Marianne Bailey. Marianne has been with Guidehouse, but she's worked many years with the federal government. In Guidehouse, she heads up all of cybersecurity for them. Marianne is not an adjunct faculty or a guest lecturer at Boston College yet. That's why she's here. So Marianne.
Great. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks so much for having me here. I'm very happy to be here today. So I'm a partner at Guidehouse. I lead our cybersecurity practice. Been there for about going on 4 years, coming up on 4 years. Very interesting consulting firm because we support both the federal government, state and local government, and commercial. So we get to see cyber across the whole landscape of government and industry. Prior to coming to Guidehouse, I was at NSA for 30 plus years. The last job that I retired from there was the head of their cybersecurity organization. I also was the principal director, deputy CIO for cyber in the Pentagon. Another big job, very interesting. So I've been around cyber a long time. I've watched it evolve and grow. I've watched our adversaries evolve and grow, and I think we're going to have a great conversation today.
Excellent. Next is we have David Diadio. Dave is with the Security Exchange Commission. He's the regulator on the panel. so don't run out of the room. And also, in keeping with the theme here, Dave is one of our adjunct faculty here in our cybersecurity program and teaches cybercrime, which is dual-hatted over at Boston College Law School as well. So, Dave.
Thanks, Kevin. It's great to be here. I appreciate being the heavy on the panel here. It's all kumbaya, partnership, this and that, and then you bring the regulator in to say we're gonna drop the hammer. But it's great to be here. Great to see everybody in person, and great to replenish my depleted supply of Boston Conference on Cybersecurity coffee mugs. So I'm really
limited edition. If you speak at BC, you get one.
So as Kevin said, I'm a senior trial attorney with the Securities and Exchange Commission. I'm in the Division of Enforcement. I've been there about 3 years, and I work closely with our rapidly expanding crypto and cyber group. Before that, I spent 10 years in the U.S. Attorney's Office as an AUSA in Boston, and I see some of my colleagues here, Seth Costo, Mackenzie Queenan. I was in the cyber unit for the large chunk of that time and worked on just the whole gamut of cyber cases, from cyber stalking to national security related cases, theft of intellectual property and the like. So I've been around it a while, and in fact, I started my career in private practice, but with another colleague, Lisa Ropel, and we were working on data breach cases back in the day. It's been a little while. The TJX case was one of my first exposures to the world of cybersecurity. So happy to be here, Kevin.
Thank you, Dave. And next up is Supervisory Special Agent Doug Domin. He's with FBI Boston, and he oversees the Cybercrime Division. In keeping, Doug was one of actually my first students in the cybersecurity program many years ago. He is a graduate of Boston College. He then went on to become a teaching assistant, and then soon enough, he has his own course where he teaches cybersecurity investigations and digital forensics, a course created by none other than Kevin Swindon, who's here as well. With that,
Thank you very much. Good morning. Thanks for being here. I like to think I represent the law enforcement components because we work very closely here in Boston with Secret Service, HSI, and IRS, as well as our state partners in the Mass State Police and other states that are represented from the Boston Division. I've been an agent for over 20 years. Started at Sun Microsystems early in my career, which is a company that does not exist anymore. But when I got into the bureau, we were printing log files out and serializing hard copies to our case files. And we've come a long way and appreciate being able to represent the bureau up here on the panel.
Perfect. So now we just did the who they are. Now we want to get into what they do. And I think it would be appropriate to start with Colonel Kearns, because many of you hear about Cyber Command and then you wonder, well, what do they actually really do? And do they work with us, or what are they? How do they help us? Nate.
So kind of sticking with today's conference theme of the public-private partnerships and where I see those things going. General Nakasone said very openly in the last few years about the head of Cyber Command, about the way in which we're doing public-private partnerships, the way in which we are finally going forward openly and talking about offensive and defensive efforts with our partners and our allies. And I think that was a huge step, as well as a large part of the deterrence. What I'll take you back to is, if you look at our national defense strategy and our national security strategy, they both mention specifically in them the National Defense Strategy from 2018, and then back in recently in 2022, mentioned very specifically about partnerships, alliances, and the need and how we can't basically move forward without that. And I think that's kind of our principal guiding lines. And so if I move forward from that, on the way we go from there, I look at our national cybersecurity strategy that just was launched a few months ago, and that again talks about public-private partnership and the need for us to move forward. And I think about what the deputy director just said about the snake malware. And if you look at who was involved in the snake malware, it was Cyber Command, Cyber National Mission Force out of Fort Meade. It was CISA to my right. It was NSA. It was FBI. It was a handful of other justice. And then it had our Canadians. It had the Aussies. It had the UK. And so what we're recognizing is not just is it a team effort from what we're seeing us do here at the local level, but all the way up to the national and federal level from the interagency partnerships, all the way to, hey, the best that exists around the world. And I was joking, we were joking on a break about the incredible work of NSA and the folks that exist there, And I think early on we were a bit myopic as military personnel in the sense that we had a belief that you must have short hair, must have this look, and recognize the need to have an all-hands approach of different people from different backgrounds that bring different things to the table. So I think that's a huge part of it. And then the final thing I'll highlight is where I see what we're doing is General Nakasone just came out with sort of a Cyber Command strategy called Own the Domain. And in it, it talks about a few areas, but people, partnerships, and people and partnerships creating a decisive advantage. And one of the things it talks about is the unity of effort with NSA, but then it also talks about the need for us to continue to do things like operations, we call them hunt forward operations. Those are operations where we go assess vulnerabilities, and it started as partners at first being a little bit apprehensive. You can understand there's always folks that are kind of like, hey, what are you doing here and why are you doing this? To where there's a line of countries now recognizing the great work that we've done to work with partners, and without going into some of the work that's been done in Ukraine or on domestic operations with our National Guard units across the 54. There's been liaison relationships created with Cyber Command, with CISA, to partner to protect both at the domestic and the local level from elections and domestic challenges all the way to the federal and international level. So I would say that's kind of the main things we're doing now. There's a strategy that specifically talks about it from the presidential level and the national level all the way to working with local academia partnerships, and one of the reasons that I'm here today.
Perfect. Thanks, Nate. So Daniel, can you talk a bit about what CISA does?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to sort of pivot a little bit on what Colonel Kearns just shared. I think this is absolutely vital, as opposed to sort of looking at this idea of partnership in the sense of, hey, let's get together and share PowerPoint presentations, which would be traditional. This is very, very different. I came from Cybercom back in 2018. My privilege to work with partners in the intelligence community, and you're absolutely right, the most diverse workforce I've ever been exposed to in my life, remarkable. But partnership is a term that gets thrown around a lot in policy level documents. This is different. And let me just illuminate this to the best ability I can. On any given day, our cybersecurity advisors, of which we have 6, soon to have 8, that are distributed across New England, will receive a target notification package of an entity, public or private, that has been compromised by a threat actor. Specific technical information to include the endpoint, perhaps account information, IOCs, other technical information to enable that entity to defend themselves. This is the federal government creating a target package for notification to enable private organizations to be able to defend themselves in this space. And that is an outcome of this partnership, but it goes one step further in the last mile, where I'm working with the team over at FBI Boston or teams here in local law enforcement across the states. All of our advisors are in communications daily, whether it be Secret Service, whether it be local law enforcement, sheriff's departments, you name it, to deliver this information as fast as possible to enable these organizations to defend themselves. That's an outcome of these partnerships. So as the director of the FBI was here last year talking about the remarkable events and circumstances about what happened with Boston Children's last year, just in the past year alone, this has become routine. That is remarkable. Where does the information come from? Again, my colleagues on this table, whether it be from the intelligence community, in some cases from the commercial security sector. And this is all an outcome of, with the support of Congress, the creation of an agency or an organization within CISA called the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative that has representation, as was already mentioned, of almost every organization inside the federal government at the agency level, and then private information service providers and cybersecurity providers and others to be able to collaborate to create actionable information. to put in the hands of those to better defend themselves. So that we're not just looking at this from a law enforcement lens, we're getting on the left side of the problem.
Perfect.
Kevin.
So I'm going to go to Doug, then Dave, and then Marianne to like really tie this together. So Doug, can you talk a bit about what you're working on, what you do?
Sure. Yeah, and I'll kind of pick it up where Daniel left off. We're working through some of these relationships which are new, and we're having some really good success here in the Boston division, in this Region 1 area of really trying to coordinate and come across as being one government, having a one government approach to the victims that we are notifying. But also, allowing there to be an opportunity where agents on my squad can speak with victims in a follow-up conversation to gain intelligence or to gain evidence for a criminal prosecution, or, as you've been hearing, what we refer to as imposing risk and consequence on our adversary. So we're using these relationships. We want to be, having a united front with all the federal partners when we are notifying those victims, and we're also leveraging each other's relationships and each other's authorities in order to make that effective and efficient.
Perfect. And Dave, like we jokingly said, like, oh, it's the regulator. He's not the enemy by any means. He has a role, and it would really great if you can, talk a bit about what your role is, and you're not going after people. Can you talk a bit about that?
I'm a super pleasant and reasonable person. I'm sure you'll all find that if you ever end up on the other side of the table from me. But it's an interesting role because the SEC's role in cybersecurity has changed over the years. We've been talking about this with public companies for years now. We issued guidance back in 2011. We followed up in 2018 with more guidance on these points about what public companies' obligations are, what they should be doing, what they should be reporting out to investors. Our lens is a little bit different than, say, the Department of Justice, who is looking for the threat actors, and the FBI. It's a little different than the Attorneys General offices, where they are thinking about this through the lens of consumer protection. We're really thinking about investor protection and the functioning of our capital markets. And that is a target of our adversaries, right? Disrupting the flow, the efficient functioning of our capital markets. So we take that really seriously. We've put a lot of resources and efforts into expanding our capacity here. And this is about partnerships, Kevin. I think partnership may be a charitable term, but our role in this is to and I'll focus on public companies because it really varies depending on the entity at issue. But for the public companies, the issuers, there's a set of rules around what should you be doing for your disclosure controls procedures. What are you going to tell investors? What do you have to report out? And there are new rules on the horizon there. But that's really the focus of our enforcement mandate. And I'll just say. I'll say two things. One is the government-mandated disclaimer that I forgot to say at the beginning, that my views are I'm here in my official capacity, but they don't necessarily represent the views of the commission, the commissioners, or the staff. With that out of the way. There's a lot of talk about reporting things to government agencies, reporting to FBI when you're the victim of some type of cyber incident. And I can tell you that from the SEC side, that information doesn't just get passed over to the SEC. You have a conversation with the Department of Justice, you have a conversation with Doug, you report through IC3. There's no, Doug doesn't text me or email me and say, hey, Dave, there's a victim, you might want to look at what their disclosures were to investors. It doesn't work that way. There can be information sharing between a regulatory agency like the SEC and the FBI. It's very different. There are rules around it, and it's typically happening when we are both looking at the same, the perpetrator. So SEC, we're interested, for instance, in insider trading all the time. And sometimes that happens, right, despite the best efforts around cyber incidents. There's an announcement of a breach, and right before that, executives or insiders have traded. Well, now we're interested in that problem. We're looking at those executives. That might be a case where there's criminal interest in that too. If we develop a circumstantial case that there was insider trading, we may partner with FBI to investigate that insider trading. But FBI isn't just passing information over about victims who have come to them in connection with a cyber incident.
Thanks, Dave. So Marianne, you're in a great perspective you can provide us because you're coming from the government, you work with the government in collaboration, and then you work with commercial entities. Can you talk a bit about how, this would be very beneficial, especially for most of the folks in the room right now who work for private industry. Can you talk a bit about how you see the different agencies collaborating, partnering together, or you see any roadblocks that are out there that you think that might be able to be fixed?
So, kind of like I mentioned, I've been in this for a very, very long time, and the collaboration today is unlike anything we've seen before, and it's constantly growing. It's getting better. Used to be, I could talk whatever, maybe a decade and a half ago, if there was some crisis, we saw amazing collaboration where everybody came together to solve some problem because it was very focused. But today it's more day to day. And then I just wanted to kind of hit a little bit about, our role. Like, I'm not necessarily talking about Guidehouse, but being in our role, the advantage that we have, because we do a lot of work with government, and we support government, and we support a lot of very strategic things in the government. So we have a lot of people working with CISA, working with FBI, working with DOJ. I can go through lots of it. We take that information and we use that to support other clients to help bolster their defenses. We do a lot of work in industry, and you may find this surprising, you may not find this surprising, but doing defensive type of activities for government agencies is not so different than it is doing it in the commercial and doing it for industry. You find that larger organizations, while not perfect, because nobody's perfect, probably have much more robust programs. Smaller organizations, they struggle because they don't have the resources. You see the same things in the agencies. So we can work with government organizations, understanding what the threats are, helping our clients prioritize on where they need to focus and what they need to do, why it's really important to partner with government, why reporting is very important. We're in this huge ecosystem, this digital ecosystem, which we've talked about, and industry has, tentacles everywhere in that. So really understanding what's happening. We have no idea how much underreporting is happening. Everybody kind of speculates, but we think it's a lot. But that is very important information for us to have. And so I think it's the partnerships are growing, all the time. We see them growing tremendously. We see information sharing growing tremendously. I remember, a time when NSA and CISA, it was the startup of the organizations and the relationships. But today, we're working on things for automated, indicator sharing, much stronger, so it happens real time. I will tell you some of the challenges probably still are declassifying information, because there's a lot of reasons that we classify information, and so how do we declassify it so that we can share it in real time? But just, sitting where I sit today, the breadth of support that we give is anywhere from very, very strategic to very, very tactical. And there still are lots of organizations, agencies, and industries that need all those different levels of support. One of the things that we were talking about a little bit was like governance, A lot of organizations have policies, but we're still seeing a lack of maturity in really implementing them and implementing throughout the organization. And so how do you get, organizations to really understand? And then we did have a conversation about boards and how boards are starting to get in tune to why they really need to care about cyber, because they do need to care.
Yeah, just to
Jump in, Dave.
just to follow up on that, I think that our role in promulgating new rules in this space and focusing on disclosures about how the boards are put together, where they have cybersecurity expertise and things like that. It's designed to do just that. Despite all the passage of time and all the talk about focusing on cybersecurity, having to actually disclose to the investing public what you're doing, what your policies and procedures look like, not in a way that reveals in a granular fashion something that the adversary can use, but to tell the public in a meaningful way, in a robust way, what the company is doing, how it's approaching this, how its reporting structure works, where they have expertise. We think that can be another kind of nudge, a push for companies that maybe don't have the same kind of robust policies and procedures in place and that architecture, despite having talked about it for years and years and years.
Perfect. And I like what Marianne said, like, why should I care? And I think that's the next point, is there's a lot of people in the audience like, hey, this is great to hear this, but what do I care? And that's where I get to the next questions out, is really how can they utilize all of you looking preemptive, and then if something happens. So I'll throw it, Doug, if I'm an organization and I'm thinking like, hey, how do I get up to speed and protect my assets? I protect personally identifiable information I have, my intellectual property, you name it. What can FBI do with that? But then also, if I'm hit, where do you come in and what help can you offer?
Sure. Yeah. So we like to have that partnership early on, way before an incident actually arises, because when you're dealing with the crisis, you don't want to be making introductions at FBI. I tell everyone I speak to, we can have a phone call. We can talk things through before paper gets filed, and we make phone calls to the U.S. Attorney's offices. One thing I really would recommend doing is understanding kind of where you sit in an assessment kind of phase, and working with CISA in that proactive way with the resources on their website, but also contacting the CSA to understand where they can fit into your preparation. What we want to know is, that you've got an incident response plan. We want to be a seat at the table, and we can help do what's called threat response, and that's different from incident response, because we're not going to walk in and start pulling logs and looking at your network. We want to provide you with information that we know about that specific threat, to allow you to have some context and inform the decision makers on what that organization is doing next, whether it's maybe the decision to have to pay a ransom, or maybe it's the decision to have to start to segregate users who might be suspect of insider threat, maybe segregate that network activity and start to limit and restrict their network access. So those are things we can kind of talk through. And it's all a case-by-case basis, and we're happy to have those conversations with you ahead of time.
And on that, Doug, I'm an organization, I have a data breach, it's going, I call you, you're not coming in as my forensics team to patch everything together and fix it and conduct the investigation.
Exactly, yeah. So we are, again, we want to understand what we refer to as the bad guy data. We want to have the information from the edge of your network external, so that we can bring that back as evidence and also as potential intelligence to move forward. We don't get involved in the kind of the melee of that internal incident response. However, we can be a resource, and we can help as a seat at the table, guide you as needed through that response.
Perfect. And I'll go to Daniel, then Nate, and Mary, and Dave, and clear this up. So talk a bit about, preventive, Daniel, and then, the reaction piece.
Yeah, certainly. So to start this conversation, I think it's important to one of the
Thanks, Doug.
important achievements or important accomplishments I think that FBI certainly made over the course of the past 20 years was putting their resources into a regional configuration where they become local, because local is where relationships are. People don't trust organizations, people trust people. CISA has certainly capitalized on the same thing, which has placed us in your communities. Cybersecurity advisors are InfoSec engineers, threat hunt experts, and in some cases, executive level CISOs that are now on a second career working for the government, providing completely free and available consultation advice as to how best to implement a program. If you don't have a seat at the table, we can certainly have conversations to try to help people get a seat at the table and need to have that conversation. But this is about trying to create programs. And certainly my director talks about the target-rich and cyber-poor communities that we work in. We work with these communities every day. They're all around us. I mean, that's small and medium business, the vast majority of our nation's economy. And they're in that condition. That's a problem. And the only way that we're going to overcome that is through literally a local hands-on approach, where we're going to have to help people guide themselves and make priority decisions about where investment and resources go. This is what the CSAs do, the cybersecurity advisors, in concert with the protective security advisors and others across CISA in the critical infrastructure role to help build programs. But it is all about trust. And it really does come down to something that works very effectively in New England, which is, I know a guy, or I know a gal. That works.
Really?
And it works really well here. That's one of the reasons why we're able to capitalize on these partnerships here with SSA, Domin, FBI, Secret Service, TSA, you name it. It's really about how do we get across this line and how do we move the needle collectively.
Yeah, and now organization, gets hit with a ransomware attack, whatever. We always talk about the information sharing. Can you talk a bit about, a lot of people's first reaction, I'm going to call the FBI, should I call CISA, who should I call? Can you talk a bit about who you should call and how that information, because there's always talk of, hey, I've called, I sent an email, and I've heard nothing, it goes into a black hole. Can you talk about that and the importance of the information sharing?
What's interesting about this is that, obviously, SSA Domin and I talk consistently, same thing with Secret Service. It really doesn't matter where you report the incident and where you're going to get a reaction. However, it's not something that look at it that I'm going to make a call to this number and a SWAT team's going to show up. That's not how this works. This is still a responsibility that we have individually across our organizations to respond, but we encourage and absolutely, I'm not going to say plead, to make the report so that this can potentially help others who are in this condition before they've been impacted. Whether it's IC3, whether it's CISA.gov, whether it is any of the organizations to report to, I would encourage everyone to do it. And while the outcome may not be specifically that someone's going to come to your spot, there are use cases where I've been contacted by the regional office here in FBI saying, we've got this case, it doesn't quite get to the point where we're going to get directly involved. Is this something you can handle? And I'm on the phone with the organization that's reported it within hours. And we're working through it to try to find some resolution for it. Again, this is the power of local, of being able to be in the same time zone, to be in the same location, to be able to work through these issues. It's a very non-federal government approach. Boy, is it powerful when it works.
So Nate, I'm going to go to you, and with Cyber Command, really different military components. So it's not like if I have a data breach, I call you, and then you zap out whoever's attacking me. That's not how it works. But can you talk a bit about really on Cyber Command and some of the things you're doing? Really novel ideas with the National Guard, whereas like the public, really military-private partnership, where you're looking for cyber experts, where they could become reserve members and they're like kind of dual-hatted. Can you talk a bit about that? I know General Keefe, that was one of his initiatives.
Yeah, so General Keefe, the TAG of Massachusetts, the Adjutant General of Massachusetts.
What's the tag?
Sorry, the Adjutant General of Massachusetts, so the head military advisor to the governor for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, who is constantly recruiting, as I should be doing right now.
That's what you're doing.
And what I will tell you is it's an incredible opportunity, and I'll mention a few things. So one, you might be saying, hey, that's great that you're out there in Ukraine, or you're doing things with international partners, or you're doing this with foreign countries, or at the federal level, but I work at this small place in Massachusetts, or this small city, or this small organization, or things like that. And one of the things that the National Guard has done across the 54, and I say 54 because there's Puerto Rico, there's Guam, there's the Virgin Islands, and there's DC. So those 4 plus the 50 states, commonwealths, and territories, is establish liaison, regional, and across a whole 54 relationships. And here's part of the reason why. There are certain states like Massachusetts, Washington State, Hawaii, Maryland that have robust cyber engagement teams or military units that focus specifically on cyber intelligence. There are other states where there are new governors or new politicians or new adjutant generals that recognize they need to put forward a better cyber defense or operational or organized team and don't have it. And one of the things we've done through Cyber Command is establish that liaison relationship. And actually we met directly with leadership at CISA about establishing a thing called the Cyber 9 line. And that allows basically different territory states amongst the 54 to basically call up and say, hey, this issue is happening, what do I do? Or we think we've found this malware, can you get one of your experts to help us better understand that? And I met with the forensic and the no-kidding people who do it in the leadership at CISA, and their response was, yes, call, be proactive, let us know, because we recognize things like WannaCry and NotPetya and those type of viruses and how quickly time is against us. And so what I would say is a few of our colleagues on this panel just mentioned about, hey, getting, having a seat at that table, having that relationship, having that conversation, I would say is if you're nascent, go out and get a seat at the table and ask. Become a part of it. Become a recruiter for wherever you work. Practice exercise like it's real world and get organized so that you know as it's happening or really before it's happening, who do I talk to? Who is my I got a guy, to quote my colleague, on how I'm going to establish that relationship. So I would say if you're interested in doing that, last year Director Ray said, why do you want to work for me versus work for one of the private industries that make more money? Because I put you up against the best. And I will tell you that's what our National Guard is doing, and that's what Cyber Command, CISA, NSA are doing against the best in the world on a daily basis.
Awesome, great. So now I'm going to go to Dave, and then I'm going to have you close it and tie it all together, Marianne.
Everybody takes all the thoughts by the time I get to speak.
Sorry, man.
Well,
It's okay, Marianne. You don't have to worry about me having it.
yeah. So Dave, what I want for you, Dave, because you're not the enemy here. Again, can you talk a bit, I know there's a resource, but that's not where you're at the SEC. I mean, a lot of people here are really worried about the new proposed rules for public companies. What does that mean? And there's a fear that once those go into effect, which could be today for all I know, it's talking about June, that game on, and there's SEC's been beefing up with an enforcement teams, and they're going to treat every company as though you're flaunting rules and you're like big tech, and we're going to come after you with a $5 billion fine. Can you talk a bit about that and put some people at ease, or maybe clear it up? Again, in your own, not SEC position.
Right, that's called leading the witness, Kevin, okay? So we're focused on a couple of different things. And obviously, we're coming in after the fact. There's some problem, and we're looking at disclosures, and hindsight is baked into the job. So you're going to meet some skepticism. And part of that, just so you understand why that's the case, is because we've been through time and time again in some of these investigations where, we ask a question, we get a nice PowerPoint, fancy PowerPoint saying there's nothing to see here, we have robust policies and procedures, and then meanwhile, there's a whistleblower telling us, you have no idea what's really going on in this company. So we do have some skepticism, but I think it's a healthy skepticism. It's a reasonable skepticism, and it's best met with facts, right? When you're responding to these, we have a growing capacity to consume more technical information. So you're not talking to lawyers who are going to stare at you blankly when you're talking about network architecture or something like that. We're not pros necessarily in the same way that some of the other people on this table are, but we can understand and digest it. And the standard's going to be reasonableness. Is your setup, are your disclosure controls, are your policies reasonable given who you are and what you do? And that's going to vary depending on, are you a major technology company that is a target because of the information you have, the intellectual property you have, or the information you keep? Or is cybersecurity, it's important to everybody, but it's sort of adjacent to what you do. And that gets kind of, it's all factored in. And as far as the new rules, Kevin, I think what they're trying to do really, in some ways, they're stricter. There are new things that are coming down the pike if the rule is adopted. And that's why I can't really talk about it, because we don't know what the final rule is until it's promulgated. There's a proposed rule, lots of comments on it. The SEC takes it back, and that part of the organization is going to put forth for the commission the final rule. But, it's really designed to tighten up principles that were already out there, to make it clearer. Hopefully it's clearer what you should be doing, the timelines, what kinds of information you're supposed to have. Materiality is always going to be a question. What do you have to, how do you make that judgment? And it's an important judgment. Again, it's going to vary. It's fact and context specific. So small company, big company, a company that has information that is potentially valuable to nation states, where you're a target, you're a target for Russians or Chinese hackers, that kind of thing, it's going to vary. So I guess the message is, I said it jokingly before, but the commission tries to be reasonable about this, and you're in a good position. It doesn't mean that the issue just goes away if there's a disclosure problem, but you're in a much better position if you can point to specific information, policies and procedures that make sense given who you are given what you do. Maybe it goes away entirely. I've shut down cases quickly if I can see that things are, bad things happen to everybody. Not every cyber incident is a securities law violation, right? So we can shut down cases quickly. If there are real problems, we can escalate them quickly. And then you have that kind of mishmash in the middle where we're just trying to figure out, was what you did reasonable, and should we point our resources elsewhere?
Perfect. So Marianne, this is key. Now I'm an organization, I hear all of this, and this is where you come in. At the beginning, you can help me shepherd me through all of this, but can you talk a bit how you help me as an organization get ready for all this and protect my assets? But then also, if it hits the fan, where you come in and what you do.
Right. So I think you heard everyone alluding to proactiveness when it comes to cybersecurity and really building up a defense. And that is from strategies and governance all the way down to what you're implementing, knowing your environment, knowing all of your assets, having strong access controls, maybe segregation of duties if necessary, maybe segregation of networks. We're still not advanced enough like we need to be, but we really do need to be prepared. And it doesn't matter the size of your company because the government can't save you or help you if you're not helping yourself. And so you definitely have a responsibility to help yourself. And I really also wanted to, and so, Guidehouse, we do this. This is a consulting firm. We work with companies and we work with organizations and agencies. Come in and evaluate your program. Come in and help you stand up a program, mature your program, meet executive orders, move to zero trust. I mean, there's all these different types of things that we do and support. But I really wanted to echo that you really have a responsibility to understand the guidance out there, to understand CISA puts out a tremendous amount of really good guidance on where adversaries are going, what to look at, where you need to focus, the relationship aspect of it. Definitely have the relationships before anything happens. I happened to be in the Pentagon in 2016 in that Deputy CIO for Cybersecurity when the OPM breach hit. That was the first huge breach that we had like that by a nation-state adversary, very, very sophisticated, very stealthy. Everybody knows it's China, so I can say, it's China now.
Yeah.
Has my data. Kind of scared me tremendously in the beginning because everything I needed to have a security clearance, every single thing about me, where I live, what cars I owned, what kind of mortgage I had, my children, their socials, my husband, so all that stuff, they have all of that. They could easily be me, right? So there were so many things we had to deal with in handling that breach, and the actual technical thing of eradicating them was trivial, to be honest with you. I mean, it was not the most difficult thing. Obviously, the military and the government people that were hit by that, they were constituents, so obviously we had a lot of help from Congress telling us how we were going to, respond to that, and then we had help from the White House. So the whole thing became very, very crazy, and they decided we had to send paper things, and at some point, somebody walked into my office and said, I need $500,000 for stamps. I'm like, what? We don't get a break on stamps, right? So, but the whole point of it is, in that moment, I learned and met a lot of people, and that added to the stress of it. So tabletop exercises, everybody's heard about them. We run them all the time, and many people run them for companies and agencies. They are invaluable because you run through these things. So when you're in the middle of a crisis, you know the relationship, you know the regulations that you have to meet, you know the rules, you know where your company is operating. Every, Europe has GDPR, so they have certain data privacy rules. The United States didn't do that. Each state has their own data privacy legislation and regulations. So it depends where your company operates and what you have to meet and how you have to handle that. So, and it's just very beneficial to be proactive, do as much preventative as possible. I think we don't do the basics. We don't do the basics well. Still, a huge percentage of attacks that we see are because of basic cybersecurity that really could have been prevented. Either there wasn't multi-factor authentication. We were kind of chatting when someone asked the question about AI and ML, and now we're using it for all this great stuff. One of our adversaries is going to use it. The minute a technology is available, they are on it. And one of the things I can tell you when I was at NSA that never ceased to amaze me is how creative they were. Our adversaries are very creative. I mean, they're using cyber for all kinds of end results that are not necessarily technical end results. It can be to, to mess with our democracy. It can be to cause civil unrest. It can be to fuel both sides of contention on social media. It is just amazing to see, all the reasons that they're using cyber to meet whatever, kind of bad thing that they want to do. So, and the last comment I'll have, we had red teams at NSA all the time, very smart people. They were very kind talking about diversity at NSA, because the conversations that we have when we weren't on mic were, there's somebody dressed up like they're going out to New York City for the night, and then there's somebody else looking like he's going to the beach party, sitting next to each other. So, we had very, very smart people that spent many, many years, learning these technical talents, and they got bored during our red teaming because they got in very quickly with very, very simple stuff, which said we were not doing the simple due diligence stuff. So that's kind of what I would implore everybody. Just have a basic cyber program, really understand it well, patch. If you're not patching critical vulnerabilities, you're giving them carte blanche roadmap to walk into your environment. So there's just, important things to do.
Perfect. All right, we have 5 minutes left, and what we'll do is open it up for a couple of questions, and then we'll pass it over to Lisa Ropel in the tabletop exercise. So with that, does anyone have any questions? Sure, Peter.
I do something in Boston College. This is for the regulators. My background in financial services before PC. The SEC has a proposal on the table to, I think, require companies now to strengthen their cybersecurity processes and procedures. How much of that is really influenced or being done in league with some of the other folks at the table there, or not at all?
What do you mean when you say in league with? Like, are we coordinating on the proposal?
In other words, what processes, what alerts, what information needs to be passed along?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't have tremendous visibility into the rulemaking, and that is where, that's what you're really getting at, how those rules are made. I can say that, the genesis of our rule, and this is sort of in the write-ups surrounding it, it's an evolution based on, in part, a belief and experience through enforcement that companies aren't setting up the systems in order to make the required reporting to investors. It's really less about, adopting what some other agency proposes. All of that stuff can be wrapped into your policies and procedures. I think it's a great thing when people come to us and say, well, we've been working with the FBI on this issue, this breach happened, here's what we did, here are the steps, we're coordinating with agencies X, Y, and Z. That's all positive stuff. It's really, though, separate from our rules on the disclosure and the disclosure controls.
Perfect. Daniel.
Yeah, I'm just going to amplify this a little bit. Certainly Congress is very aware and concerned about the consequences of regulatory outcomes from legislation, especially in terms of when something becomes onerous to an industry, because it's counterproductive. So I'll give you an example of one that's recently emerged after the National Cyber Strategy. EPA comes out with a requirement to do a specific type of additive assessment on water treatment systems as part of their safety survey. Instead of creating something whole cloth from operational control technologies, we went over to CISA and took the cyber protective guidance that was just released maybe, I guess, about 6 months previous to that, and just said, do this. Now we're harmonizing across multiple agencies. Yes, they remain the regulator, but we're actually harmonizing across government to be able to be more efficient and set standards that are achievable.
Perfect. I actually can't take any more questions. We're already a half hour over. So with that, I want to thank our panel, Daniel, Nate, Marianne, Dave, and Doug. You got a lot of information here, and thank you so much for your time.